Welcome, sojourners of the darkened woods, to the verdant and deadly forests of the mortal realms, because today we are talking all about the Sylvaneth, a faction that has always gripped me aesthetically, and as you can tell, this is also my first shot at a new style of format. I hope to redo all of my lore weeks with better audio and a more clean feel, and what better way to begin this process of renewal for the channel than talk about the tree folk who are all about renewal themselves. So in this series, we're going to be talking about the Sylvaneth, who they are, where they come from, and what sets them apart from any other army in the game, why you should fall in love with them. Now, one thing I want to add right up top here, if you like this video, you're considering this faction, please use the affiliate link in my description down below. Not Just Gaming is an awesome store here in the US on the East Coast with 15% off all Games Workshop products, and using that link goes an immensely long way to supporting me, my wife, this channel, our cats. It's all life-changing stuff and I deeply appreciate it. Now, for those of you who are new to Age of Sigmar or the Sylvaneth in general, this video is all for you, because the Sylvaneth, and I can't emphasize this enough, are truly unlike any other faction in the game. Their strength of arms comes from bark and thorn rather than muscle and sinew, and that's just one little joke to introduce the idea that they are a truly ancient and alien race. They don't age like we do. They don't form relationships. They don't have the same values that we do. Nothing like that. So actually, as you read Black Library novels, you begin to see just how hard it is to work alongside the Sylvaneth. It's easy to look at this and be like, oh yeah, they're in the forces of order. They got a good guy for, their queen. That's awesome. They're all on the same board, thumbs up all around. The truth is there's a lot of inner turmoil because they do not value anything that the rest of order as a grand alliance values. They don't see human life as having any kind of inherent meaning, and that goes doubly so for orcs and elves and all the other stuff that exists in Age of Sigmar. They value nature, to the point where they would much rather kill 1,000 people than see a single tree taken down. Now, as a faction, the origins of the Sylvaneth is actually interesting as well, because they are probably the most long-lived of the standing armies that we know today. Alarielle, the goddess of life magics and queen of Ghyran, the realm of life itself, was strolling through her garden in the earliest days in the Age of Myth, seeing that she wanted more life to happen. She needed garden tenders, essentially, for all this life magic that she was imbuing. She wanted people to curate, so to speak, all the forests and the magnitude of wildlife that exists in the realms. So, reaching into her pocket, basically, she took out a clutch of seeds that she had kept from the old world, which is a prehistory setting. You may know it as Warhammer Fantasy Battles, the game that Age of Sigmar comes afterwards chronologically. And she begins to sprout these seeds all over the place, and these seeds would form the first groves, with small little creatures of some varying degree of sentience crawling out of the earth in service to the Everqueen. Now, these initial Sylvaneth, their mission was very simple. Fill the realms with life in abundance, prune the gardens, spread the forest, purify the rivers, and bring the fruits of life magic to every corner of creation. Which is a really, kind of a beautiful, straightforward protocol that they have to follow. And while it may seem that Alarielle has just formed an entire, army of farmers, maybe a bit lacking in personality, nothing could be further from the truth. Because there's so much going on to the Sylvaneth, their physiology, their biology is so diverse, and so are their values, and I want to kind of start to tackle a bit of that. You see, when a seed that will become a Sylvaneth is planted, the location and the season in which they are born has a direct impact on its role and personality. So places that are planted in harsh winter conditions will grow a very hard-bitten bark. They can withstand any kind of storm. They might even use elemental magics with them. Maybe they're emotionless and very cold in terms of their nature. Whereas, if one is planted in, say, the realm of fire, they're very impetuous, very adversarial. They see life as being this very fleeting thing, and so their personality traits will be directed as such. When you factor in how different the realms are, realm to realm, and then the various seasons of those realms within them, you get a sense that there are some very important locations. There's a wide diversity of Sylvaneth temperaments, personalities, motivations, values, all of that. And when Alarielle planted these early groves, these first ones, they didn't just sprout up a couple Sylvaneth here and there. In fact, they formed entire civilizations and complex hierarchies and structures. In fact, these early groves soon became what we know as war groves, which are basically just different kinds of armies and sub-factions, but they formed entire army networks that would span massive amounts of distance. You got to remember that an actual forest, in our real world is quite large. Like a true wilderness, think of like a government protected nature site, something like that. Just massive stretches of land. One army across all of that is a tough call. So what they do is they spread and they make new groves and they splinter off, but they are all bound together as a single war grove. And not only are their temperaments and their values based upon where they come from, but also like their literal structure. So like some Sylvaneth are these diminutive little tree folk like dryads. Others are living battering rams that are tree lords or angry spirits of the past that are basically used to fuel the destructive needs of the Sylvaneth. And so you can kind of get a sense that they're so reactive. They're such a mirror of the realms themselves in terms of where they're planted, when they're planted, and the personalities that those things bring, that this becomes a very fascinating faction to talk about. It's filled with social hierarchies, alliances, outlooks, and on aiding others and so on. Like some are very willing to collaborate with other species, others are super xenophobic. And while, yes, they all share that same core function of, a deep integral connection to nature and a desire to see it blossom, but how they achieve that can range from anything from peace-loving gardeners who are, generally speaking, non-violent, to being the very dark things that lurk in the woods and actively attack the quote-unquote good guys. Because there's no shortage of other factions from Order being absolutely wiped out for trespassing into the wrong part of the woods. So there's a lot going on. They're very aggressive, at least they can be, and deeply territorial. Now, as I kind of do these lore weeks to kind of introduce factions to new folks, I tend to pick on a few subjects that are just very important, right? It's so hard to cover an entire battle tome's worth of information, but this first video I wanted to pick out at least 3 key things that you should really know about the Sylvaneth. For this, I picked the Spirit Song, the Lementari, and the Realm Roots, and then we're going to have a discussion on how come they're so awesome here at the end. So we have these tree people that are kind of spread all over the place. Their main job is to facilitate life and fight off any forces that hinder that, but what is this notion of the Spirit Song? If you are in a forest in the mortal realms, you'd hear the normal things, right? You hear birds and maybe the breeze blowing through trees, that kind of stuff. But the Sylvaneth, with their attuned hearing, can hear so much more. They all communicate with an exclusive magic called the Spirit Song. Think of it like a short wave radio that all Sylvaneth are tuned into at all times and nobody else can hear. So that same person standing out in the woods hears nothing, but the Sylvaneth in the woods may be heard communicating to one another about, hey, there's intruders coming in the western end. They can coordinate battle plans on how to assault them. There's a lot of radio chatter, so to speak, going on in the woods that you and I simply cannot comprehend. Now, this has immediate practical benefits if you understand military history. Like, I'm a huge fan of World War I buff, that kind of stuff. You know the importance of radio upon its debut. If one army has a way to communicate over vast distance and the other doesn't, the one who has the walkie-talkie has massive tactical power over its opponent. Because you can coordinate these huge offensives from miles-long war fronts with perfect precision. You can win decisively as a result of that. But on a spiritual level, it also connects all of the Sylvaneth together. Just as, if you're familiar with biology, if one section of a tree root decides to, or starts to die or wither, it will send resources from other parts of the tree to help re-strengthen and regrow. The Spirit Song essentially does the same thing, but allows the Sylvaneth to coordinate reinforcements in the same way that a single tree coordinates resources. They are the thing that binds the faction together. And I like the Spirit Song because, again, it's a very immediate military, advantage that very few other armies have anything like that. There are a few exceptions in Age of Sigmar, but this is one of the rare ones that's army-wide. But at the same time, it connects and binds them all on a very spiritual level. And with this Spirit Song, the Sylvaneth Groves can actually call out to one another, they can request aid, they can warn one another, so it's not just within their own war groves, but it's a species-wide ability to communicate. Now, a few things to note on the Spirit Song. there does seem to be a range. Like, it's not like every Sylvaneth is constantly in contact. Like, it's not the World Wide Web. It is closer, like I said, to a shortwave radio. The exception to that rule, though, is Alariel, their goddess and creator. She can hear all spirit songs and be heard by her. So when she talks, every Sylvaneth can hear. They just can't always necessarily communicate between one another. And this really does matter quite a bit, because there are multiple stories within the Battle Tome of Alariel addressing something to the species as a whole, and them all responding immediately. But then there's also times where Sylvaneth are crying out for help and there's no one to come. So that you still have those levers to pull of like high drama when there's no reinforcements coming. But you also get this cool thing of like their god themselves can talk to them, which is a thing that very few factions in this game can boast. Another thing that comes up in the book here is that the stronger, more elite units within the Sylvaneth army tend to have a stronger connection to the spirit song. They can hear it from greater distance, communicate greater distance, and it kind of invigorates them and everyone around them. Almost as if they were like a radio dish or something like that. The stronger the unit, the more connection and communication they have with their own deity. Now, the next thing I want to touch on here is this concept of the Elementari and the Soul Pods. And this is something I want to bring up to really emphasize what I said earlier, that they are a truly alien faction. The Sylvaneth do not have normal life and death cycles as you and I know them, but instead they view all of time and all of themselves as purely cyclical in nature. So instead of having the cycle of life, growth, aging, and death, theirs is much more of a loop. The start of a Sylvaneth's life, doesn't matter if they're a Dryad or a Tree Lord Ancient, they all start at a soul pod, a site of life magic that is uncorrupted and highly intense. So wherever there are natural motes of occurring Ghyran magic, these are fantastic places to start a soul pod. Now, these locations are considered to be like irreplaceable artifacts or relics by the Sylvaneth. And once a soul pod is planted, meaning a whole bunch of seeds are laid down there, new Sylvaneth will begin to germinate and grow into whatever form the Wargrove needs. So, this means there's a lot to unpack here, because we talked about earlier, the location of where these things are has a massive effect on their temperament, their personality, their values, and motes of occurring life magic are, I don't want to say common, they're kind of spread all over the place though, like every realm has them, so you can kind of theme your army to be wherever you want it from. Regardless, they are rare enough that they have to be defended with like all of a Wargrove's vigor. Also to note, not only is the temperament dictated by what location they're in, but also each seed that will become a Sylvaneth can grow into literally whatever they need at the moment. If they need warriors, they'll make one unit over another. People are manufactured in a way that humans simply can't do. It's almost like they are very reactionary when they're in seed form. Again, they take on characteristics native to that soul pod. They'll sprout up, generally looking like its fellows, sharing in their peculiarities or their temperament. And when we talk about the major Wargroves, this is how they maintain their unique characteristics and identities. X Grove is generally like Y. Why are they like that? Well, because they all formed from the same stuff, the same impressions from nature, the same power of Ghyran sprouting up wherever they are. It forms a very cohesive type of army. So that's why you don't have some that are like born in winter months that are super, frigid and cold, and others that are born in spring and they're nice and inviting. They tend to, as a Wargrove, feature one dominant personality trait, because they all came from the same soul pod. So a Sylvaneth army's first mission, above anything else, is to maintain the security of its soul pod. Again, it's like a fingerprint, it's what makes them unique. But along with that is this concept called the Elementari, or the Elementiri, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that. This is a small, glowing, seed-like object that every Sylvaneth has within them. Should a Sylvaneth die from age or in battle, the Elementiri is removed and planted back at the soul pod. When this is planted, it shares the experiences, the wisdom, and the knowledge of that dead Sylvaneth with every other Sylvaneth who is trying to sprout at the same time. And so it becomes a way to pass on generation to generation all kinds of wisdom and knowledge. It's kind of like saving your grain progress and then attributing it to others so that no one starts at zero. So taking a step back, if you were to plant a grove of trees, right? The trees start to grow, they become trees, and then eventually they'll have a point where they start bearing fruit, and that fruit can then be placed in the ground to grow more groves and that kind of thing. The same thing is happening. The Sylvaneth are coming out very unique based on their location. At some point in their development, they all grow a Lamentiri, which upon their death can be harvested, put back into the soul pod, and it just overall makes the species, or at least that war grove, better, smarter, wiser from the get-go. In this way, you can have tree lords burst from the ground with decades of battle prowess, branch witches that are born with an innate ability to cast devastating magics, or something simple of just everyone knowing how to survive well in a given location, right? It was just basic survival information about what their geography is like. And so for obvious reasons, these two resources are defended with the utmost extreme force, but it also makes them a massive target. If you're an enemy and you know that there's one place that your opponent is born at and that's where all their reinforcements come from, just attack that. If you know that they can basically pass knowledge like this, you have a scorched earth policy where you leave none standing and you don't let them collect their dead, that's how you cut off knowledge generationally pretty simply. So while it is a fantastic system for having this very long and drawn out life cycle that passes on information and theoretically has exponential wisdom growth over time, it can fall apart pretty quickly if the enemy catches on. And the last thing I want to touch on here is the realm roots. And I like to touch on this last because it's the thing that you and I get to play with on the table, more so than any of these other things I mentioned. To put it really simply, realm roots are like shortcuts in reality. Mystical pathways that are known only to the Sylvaneth that allow them to traverse massive distances simply and quickly. So like an example of this, say everybody else has to take a road around a mountain. Yeah, we have to go all around the base of the mountain, maybe avoid a forest that's along there, or maybe we'll skate along a river, that kind of thing. A realm route would be the equivalent of having a tunnel that goes directly under the mountain and under the river and you pop out the other side. The destination doesn't change. The speed at which you can traverse that distance is greatly shortened. And while it sounds like an awesome benefit, that hey, nice, easy travel is awesome. Yeah, who would say no to that? But it plays into their military style as well. The Sylvaneth themselves don't typically have these colossal standing armies and cannons and all that kind of thing. They typically rely on brutal hit and run tactics. They encircle their enemies, they bait them into traps, and so on. So when you combine shortcuts in reality that only you know about with your shortwave radio that your opponents don't have and cannot listen into, you can see that there are some very aggressive tactics that you can put on the battlefield. In game terms, this is how you teleport from forest to forest, and it works largely the same in lore. You may walk right into a Sylvaneth ambush, get attacked savagely, and the minute you start to gain some momentum back, the enemy just vanishes. It waits till you get tired again, or it's dark out or something else, and then it attacks again. It just keeps happening over and over again, and this is truly why the Sylvaneth are the things that go bump in the woods. They are scary. The minute you walk into a forest in the Age of Sigmar setting, you're being watched, your movements are being telegraphed to every other Sylvaneth in the woods. You probably can't see them. They're going to encircle you with paths that you didn't know existed, attack you very savagely, and the second you manage to get a counterpunch going, they're gone. And it's just you and everyone who's dead in the woods, probably all turned around at this point. It's a really scary proposition, and when you start to think about that in context of some of the stories that come out from Black Library, you can see that they would be a terrifying opponent to have to fight in real life. And so I want to end this video talking about why is this cool, right? I try to end all my videos, if you're new to the channel, with this. We can talk about facts all day, but why is this such a cool concept for an army or for a bit of fiction? Well, I like the Sylvaneth for a few reasons. One, they are a crafted people, but they are not automata, right? They're not devoid of personality or anything like that. Their personalities are weird. They tend to be more reserved. They have different values, but they're not like robots. That being said, they are carefully crafted. The amount of dryads to tree lords, all of those ratios, they're calculated based on what the needs of the forest and the work is. You don't have a say in what you become, but someone did choose for you to become, say, a tree lord versus a spirited Earthu or something like that. So there's this cool mix of they're automata-like, but not quite. They do have their own souls and their own spirits and their own personalities. And how those two things interact with one another is a very cool mixture. I also want to touch on the preeminence of Alarielle. Okay, she is every page of this book. Okay, their battle tome, I feel like has something pointing it back to Alarielle. And honestly, I like when deity level characters show up in the game and then things are tied to them in a meaningful way. She's just awesome. She can make the lore work for anything. If you have a weird army, just say Alarielle sent them, right? I mean, it's a MacGuffin, but it absolutely works like that. She is just as aloof and different and alien in her motivations as all of the Sylvaneth are, so she's not called on a ton to help when it comes to like Sigmar's pantheon of good gods, so to speak, because just like her children, she's got her own things going on. And I kind of like that, honestly. More so than anything else, I think the Sylvaneth are awesome for representing the realms, right? The overall health of the setting, they are nature with attitude. If the realms become corrupted with forces of chaos, the Sylvaneth will begin to wane and they will struggle. The minute that order takes root and they start to like fight back against the chaos and there's a light in the darkness, the woods become teeming with life all over again. Like they're also a barometer of what's happening in the setting because they are the gardeners, the tenders, the people who are trying to maintain nature itself. And as a last little bit here, I love the way that they've written them out. So Games Workshop a lot of times will have different ways for players, you and I, to make our own custom stories. So if you're talking Space Marines for 40k, it's that you can custom create your own chapter. If it's Stormcast Eternals, it's your own Storm Host or Enclave for Sylvaneth, or for Deepkin. But the Sylvaneth are unique in that there's more dials, I feel, that you can turn to make a custom force. Because not only are you getting whatever their sub-faction is, which most have, but also what season they were born in, what realm they were born in, those two things and how they interact with one another is just its own deal. But then how they interact with creating a temperament and a value system for each Sylvaneth, then you can factor on, like layer on things like, where have they been? What have they lost? Have they been moved? Did Alarielle pull them from Akshi and now they're in, Giran and they can't reconcile with the other Sylvaneth? I guess my point is the idea of having cyclical natures and seasons and locations define their temperament. Those three levers give you and I unprecedented ability to create some really cool custom factions. And this is why I think painters take so much fun liberty when it comes to Sylvaneth. You see everything from cherry blossoms to fall and autumn to vibrant forests to weird ones that are like bright blue leaves that doesn't exist in the real world. Like all these cool things because their environments are so extreme that they can create whatever. And I love whenever an army has a built-in way for true artist expression. And I feel like that's always been a really defining feature of the Sylvaneth. Like from when they were first debuted with those cool Kurnothi kits that came out for them and that kind of thing of like, this is a faction where you can create something truly beautiful and it always makes sense in the lore. It really truly does. Like I made that joke earlier about if you build a super dumpy army and you're like, I need a motivation for these units together, just say Alarielle sent them. It's because she does stuff like that in the books. Like she'll just get a group, whoever is standing in this particular area, right now, we need you. Go fight. And that's the army, right? That kind of stuff happens. And between the freedom of painting expression, lore origins, and faction building, I just feel like the Sylvaneth are a phenomenal Age of Sigmar army. And yeah, we only covered 3 of the high points here, but I think that those are definitely the biggest takeaways to understand them in the lore sense, right? Like if you're reading any given campaign book and they bring up the Sylvaneth, they're probably going to bring up the Spirit Song. The realm roots are important because it's something that we interact with on a day-to-day basis when we're playing games. And then as far as the soul pods and the Elementari, like I think that's important just to show to you that they have stakes, they have a thing that they're always defending, and it greatly defines their character. So I hope those 3 points are useful to you. When we come back, we're going to go a little bit deeper into the rest of the Sylvaneth roster. I have sort of a new approach to talking about sub-factions that I hope you'll like, but beyond that, I think you're in for a very enjoyable lore week focusing on the bark and leaves of the Sylvaneth. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. I cannot wait to chat with you again. Click subscribe if you want to follow along with us this week. I hope to see you in my next video. Happy wargaming.